Hi y'all, welcome back to my shop. Today we're going to turn a pretty simple spindle project. I think it's a great skill builder for beginners because you can turn lots and lots of them, and for more advanced turners, maybe you want to develop your speed. See how fast you can make these things. How quickly can you make enough of them to fill up a bowl, similar to this bowl that I've turned on spheres and this bowl that I've got on eggs. And I had someone visiting a shop said, oh, she'd just love to have a bowl filled with acorns. And so this is the approach that I'm taking. You know, I like to use a steb center or a multi-point center. This one is from Record Power, but you can also get them from Sorby and Axminster. And it's spring-loaded, which is why I prefer it for this kind of project rather than a two-prong or a four-prong spur drive where you got to hammer it in the end with a mallet. Because with it, if you get one with the spring tension, then all you got to do to tighten it is mark centers, mount it, and then bring up the tailstock support, and the pressure, even on a mini lathe, you can tighten it enough to turn the thing. People ask me, how tight do you get it? And the trick that I would say is grasp your hand wheel, grasp the work, and can you easily, will it slip? And as long as it doesn't slip, it's good enough, because it doesn't have to be a death grip where you're going to strip out your gears or nuts, bolts, or screws. So let's switch to a smaller tool rest and get to going. I'm using a piece of white oak, red oak rather. So you can see the size here. It's 2 1/4 by 2 1/4 by 4 inches, or if you're metric, which I wish the US was, 56 by 56 millimeter by 100 millimeter. And mark it, mount it between centers, put on your face shield or spindle or your safety glasses, bring up the tool rest, put the tool rest where you got a gap that you couldn't quite get your finger in, and turn it to make sure it clears. And then the first thing we're going to do is take a spindle roughing gouge and turn it around. Notice I'm coming off the tool rest, or past the tool rest, past the wood. I'm never coming from onto the wood, because if you catch a crack or a splinter there, you'll have that wood shrapnel. Now we're going to mark a tenon. I can pretty much do that by eye, but I'm using the live center as kind of a reference. Pretty rough cut. I've got a little bit of a crack here on the end, but I don't think it's going to cause me any problems. I'm going to go take the skew, raise this up to about cutting at the 11 o'clock position along the top, because you've got a 40 millimeter included angle, but only 20 degrees cutting, so you have to raise the tool rest up a little bit. One of the few times you will raise it above center. Go ahead and mount this in a chuck. And I'm going to bring up tailstock support for some of this as long as I can. You get out here and you're getting a little bit of leverage for these this small tenon, so not a bad idea to always use tailstock support as often as you can and as long as you can. Okay, now the way I'm going to turn this is I'm going to mark this something like this. So I'm going to have just a tiny little bit of damage here, so I know I've got to remove a 1/16 of an inch or so. The acorn will be somewhere here, the husk here, and over here we'll have the stem. Okay, so I'm going to initially cut down with a spindle, with a skew, just to mark that area. Now I'm going to bring this down just a little bit with peeling cut. gouge cut on this. Okay, so I want this a little bit smaller than the husk, maybe a little bit more. Maybe I'll round into it just a little bit. And now we'll start shaping. But I want to switch to a 1/2 inch spindle gouge because I can remove material a little bit faster. And I'm almost there. Now I'm going to go ahead and mark the top of the husk. Right there. I'm going to take it down a little bit. Now that frayed up area, that's what happens sometimes with some woods when you start with a peeling cut with a parting tool. So you initially go straight in, then you drop the handle. That'll keep from getting that fraying action. So now we're just going to round this over. Back. I'm going to round this over a little bit more here. I want to leave it fairly flat initially. I'll show you why. Alright. I'm going to do some texturing here. So I want to sand that just a bit. We're going to use some fairly coarse sandpaper. Doesn't have to be perfectly smooth, but you're not going to get a chance to sand it again. We use some sanding lubricant here, a little DIY mineral oil beeswax. Keeps the dust down, fills the pores with a slurry. I'm using my new Woodturner's Wonders track dust collector hood. And actually with this camvac it works better if you sand underneath here. You get the stream pointing to the opening better. Maybe you see the dust. But if you do it over top, it's bringing it around and somebody's going to miss it. So it does work better if you do the sanding low. And then we're going to try a little bit coarser grit, a little finer grit, and then we're going to call it quits. This is a 180. Okay. Now, next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and do some texturing here. I'm going to use my water absorbing texturing wheel. I'm using a quartz wheel because this is fairly coarse wood. I'm not sure. Let's hope this is not a mistake. I'm going to set this out like that and just go to the overhead. We're just going to do some cross hatching. I've got this set at the number 2 position. We'll slow this thing down a little bit to below 700. Double side up. And a little bit of shredding, that's okay. Now I'm going to reverse the direction here. The 2 on the other side, then we're going to pick up the cut here and go back around. And it gives me a nice shredded kind of look, not neat and clean like some, but perfectly acceptable. Then I'm going to use non-woven abrasive pad to get rid of the technical term is the friskies or whatever you call it. Just kind of burnish to get rid of the little pieces of wood hanging off. And I like the look of that. That looks good. Now we're going to go ahead and take it off here. Bring off the tailstock support. Go ahead and bring it around. On the tool rest around, switch to a 3/8" spindle gouge and get a point on that. Speed back up a little bit. Look at the cut. Rough edge here. Let's see if I can clean that up a little bit. And we'll sand that out a little bit. And that's pretty much our acorn. Actually, there's a little fat down on this end. Let me bring this whole side down just a little bit. Go ahead and sand that down, and then we'll start working on bringing the husk, bringing the stem in. Because this is kind of a production style project, I want to do as much finishing on the lathe as quickly as I can. So I'm going to use some cellulose sanding sealer to kind of seal this a little bit, and then I'll use a shellac-based friction shine on it. Okay, use whatever sanding and finishing protocol you want. After I put the sealer on, I'm using some DIY abrasive paste, similar to Yorkshire grit or UBEE. Just rub it in with the lathe stationary. And I'm not putting it in here in this textured area, I'm just doing it right here. You could probably have skipped the sanding sealer, and I don't think it makes much difference, but I know Yorkshire Grip recommends that. They help seal the pores a little bit, so we're just going to, we gave it a couple of minutes to dry, now we're just going to friction this, get rid of any micro scratches. I stopped sanding up to about 240, 280. Okay, we got that. Now I'm going to go ahead and use some shellac-based finish. I'm using Mylan's friction finish, which is, like I say, kind of shellac-based. Dries very quick. And for this kind of project, these are pen finishers, but this kind of project, it's kind of quick, and it'll shine. Shiny cells. And that looks like almost a glass polish finish. That really looks good. Okay, now I can go ahead and take the stem down. I'm going to take it back about an inch gap, so I've got room to get rid of that sharp edge there. Okay, now I'm going to round that over with a spindle gouge. Pick up the cut right here. Get rid of that hard edge. We'll come back and sand it. Try to cut away what I can. Several ways to shape this stem. This is just one. Now I'm going to put some metallic wax in here just to kind of give it a little different look. So I want to seal the wood. If it wasn't for that, I might use some type of oil finish or antique oil, wipe on poly or something that I could blot in here. But I'm just going to use some Def spray lacquer. Give that just a few moments to dry. And I've got 3 different color accent pastes. I've got copper, green, and gold. The gold might look interesting. The green I think could look interesting. I think I'm going to try the green. I'm going to apply this with an old toothbrush, and so I can just rub it in a little bit. And it's just going to get in there and just kind of highlight it a little bit. At least that's what I'm hoping. Highlight a little bit. And I guess there's no reason to say you couldn't use a couple of colors, so I'm going to use a chip brush that I cut back, and I'm going to use that because we know from the old days when we used to polish our shoes that a brush on wax would really leave a nice shine. So I'm just going to use these hard bristles and kind of polish it up, rub it in. I'm not going to bother to put a finish on top of this. And I think it'll shine on the surface, or maybe not. Anyhow, it's added just a little bit of color. Now it's time for us to part this off, and I think I'm going to put just a tiny little V groove right there to kind of frame the texturing. So let me bring this around. Use my point tool just to come in right here. Put a little ring. Maybe a second one. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and take this off. I'm going to kind of shape the top. And do something cutting with this. I'm just going to take this. Use it like a skew. I may have a link to this at the end. It's called a shear spear. It becomes a very fine point, but it makes it easy to kind of use as a finishing skew to take something loose. So let's give this a try. A little bit easier using one hand than a skew. And there we go. And I like the shape of that. Just touch up sanding, rub a little more finish over here and here, and then I'll have it. All right, let me show you some other ways you could texture the husk. You can use, like I mentioned before, most any hardwood for these acorns. I have put some what they call gesso. It's a artist pigment that acts kind of like a sizing or kind of a primer that has some teeth to it, just so you can see a little bit better. I'm using my large spiraling and texturing tools because apparently my smaller set, I think I must have left it at the last club workshop I did at my club, so hopefully I can pick them up next month. So we're going to start with, I've got a whole playlist on texturing. You can get more details there, but let me just show you quick and dirty with the spiraling texturing tool. We're going to turn the speed down a little bit to less than 750. And you can either just go straight in, and you get these tiny little what I call orange peel. You turn it sideways, and they're more aggressive. So that gives you that technique. You can use the one I just showed you with spiraling with cross hatching, and I'm going to use a little smaller wheel on this. Give that a try. come in from the other side. This is poplar, so it doesn't hold the detail quite as well, but yeah, it's got a nice knurling effect that showed up well on this this sample. And with this knurling tool, you got two different versions. You get size versions. The wider one, it's easier to do an overlap on, but basically it's a 16 teeth per inch for really harder woods. For coarser woods, the 12 TPI works well, so let's try both of them. And you just got to hold it in there a while. And don't think you can see that very well. Let's do the one that's a little finer. There's that texture, so there's another alternative. Now let me show you one more. Another technique I haven't used much is this high-speed steel burr on a Dremel where you're just punching it in. I'm going to use the tool rest just for support, and we're going to do this with the lathe off. Anyhow, that gives you something else to play with. I'm using the flame one. I seem to have misplaced my ball burr. Those are all techniques. Well, hallelujah. I found where I'd hidden it. My other small texturing tools. So I'm using the round burr on my shop-made Dremel burr texturing tool, and let's just see how this works. We're going to turn the lathe on for this one, and this may or may not work that well. We'll see. I just moved it back and forth, and it gave a texture not greatly different from the knurling tool. Let's hold it at a different angle. And move it slowly. And it's given a nice swirly effect that I think if you can figure out exactly how to do it on the curved edge, might look well, might look good. The other technique is use some type of embellishing wax. In this case, let's try. I've got a piece of oak. You need to do this in a very coarse grained ring diffuse, rather ring porous wood such as oaks or ashes, and I'm sure there's some others, but something with a real prominent grain. I'm using some of this Hampshire Sheen white embellishing wax that Jeff Horning of the Walnut Log left me when he was a house guest some time back, so we're just going to rub some of that on there. And this has some little mica powders in there to make it kind of shiny, which would be kind of funky. We're going to put that on there and just let it dry a little bit, rub it in. First, you need to seal it a little bit so you don't get the wax on areas you don't want it. So when you go to wiping it off, it'll mostly be down in the pores of the grain. Now we're going to try some brie wax, which is in this case I think it's some type of brown wax. Heck, you could use brown shoe polish and give that a try. We're going to rub this in. And it just highlights. It's not going to have a huge impact. But you got to put it in there and let it dry for a few minutes to be able to then clean it off. I use this brown wax on this particular one. You can barely see it, but it just fills in the darker pores, and it's slightly darker contrast between this wood and this wood. And while that wax is drying, I'll show you the other technique, and that's use some type of dye. In this case, I'm using Chromacraft, and I'm using yellow because I think yellow could look really nice on the bottom part of the acorn. But you can use other colors up here for kind of a funky look. Be sure to wear gloves. If it gets on your hands, it's going to be there. And again, depending on the color, if you use a light color like this yellow, it might just give it some highlight and just enough to, you know, contrast a little bit. If you're making a bowl full of these, you want them maybe to look a little bit different. And if it's a little too bright for you, you can always take a fine sandpaper and just sand it back just a little bit. This is certainly also a great technique if you're using burl. So that's another technique. So let's crank this up. Take this glove off. Grab another piece of kitchen paper, or paper towel as we call it here in the U.S., and just fold it over. And now let's just hit this thing. We're going to go with this white first. And now let's hit this. Just remove the excess. And varnish it in. Once the wax dries, you don't really need to cover it with anything, but you get a feel for what the effects of it can be, I think. Okay, this technique may not be for the faint of heart. I've got a little water here. I'm using a piece of ash, and you have to sand it to the finished piece. I'm going to just do the husk, and then I'm going to deal with that, and then we're going to come back on the lathe to turn the rest of it. So let's see how that works. Using a propane burner, and we're just going to scorch it. Keep it moving. This burns away the soft seasonal growth and leaves the texture. Once more. Into the base. Okay, I think I got what I want to get out of that. Now let's turn this off and go back inside and deal with the rest of it. I've got this remounted on the lathe, and now we're just going to use a brass brush to kind of brush off the excess soot and clean out the pores that we don't want to show. And I think what it's going to leave definitely leave a textured surface. And we can put some liming wax in there to add some contrast for kind of a neat look, similar to the bowl that I'm showing here. Same technique. Or this platter. Same technique. Clean some of that soot off. We don't want the soot transferring to the clean part that we're fixing to turn. Now I'm going to turn the rest of the acorn, and that's why I didn't take shape at first, because I didn't want the flame to damage the rest of the acorn. So let's go ahead and shape it. 3/8 inch spindle gouge. Alright, let's sand that up. Okay, got everything sanded down, hit it with a light coat of sanding sealer. Now we're going to use some liming wax. I've had this can for close to 15 years, haven't used a whole lot. I'm sure it's a lot more expensive now than it was then. Because it's not something you use a lot, but it is an interesting technique. So I'm putting a little bit on here. And I'm going to rub it over the whole thing, because I'd like this to highlight a little bit, but I also want the black to highlight. So we're just going to rub it on. Rub it in the pores. Okay, I left it to dry for a few minutes, not too many, long enough to put a few tools away. So now let's get rid of the excess wax. Almost waited too long on the black, but not too bad. It's do some vertical polishing here. Okay, I like that. Looks good. The little bit of white highlight, too much in here in the corner. Let me deal with that. But it did highlight this part of it very well and highlighted that part very well. Now the challenge is going to be, I'll have to decorate the top with a little different black, maybe a little dye or something for the area that didn't burn. So let's go ahead and turn that off. Ash is hard stuff. Now I've got to clean up this surface. I'm going to use this pointed detail gouge so I can get in here easily. Have to speed up a little bit. And let's get in there with just a little bit of sandpaper. Okay. But you've got to sand good because that stuff's going to stick to every surface. So if you have any flaws in your sanding, it's going to, the liming wax will highlight it. And there we have it. The top is a little rough. I may jam chuck this to clean that up. I think I will. Okay, I'm using a jam chuck I use for finishing eggs. Rub just a bit of chalk in there to give it a little more grip. I'm going to just center it as best I can. It doesn't fit as well as I'd like, but I think it would probably do the job. Let's get a feel for how it turns. It's off a little bit. I think that's going to be close enough. And now I'm just going to tape this with some painter's tape for security. But you got to make sure I'm taping it in the right direction. So bring this side down first. Okay, that's just enough to keep it flying out, not really enough to hold it. But I think it's going to be strong enough where I can come in there with a sharp tool and clean up that surface, maybe apply a little dye to it. Well, the burning was fun, but I've got to say, for a project this small, I would have done just about as well to dye this whole area and then deal with the liming as opposed to going to that trouble of having to work on it twice, once with dye, once with scorching. But neat effect.